giving the government the ability to control speech is too much, giving too much power to the government, right? And usually it starts with things that people agree that should be limited, and then it will, that's basically, once you allow that, once the government gets their foot in the door, they will eventually open it wide open, and it will get to places where then once you allow them to come for that speech, then you don't know how far that's going to go. So that's my main point. And I'm saying, like, when uh, a lot of the allowing insulting Islam is more about not letting the government drawing red lines where it comes to what speech is allowed, more than more than convincing people out of Islam. It's more of a free speech thing rather than convincing Muslims out of Islam thing, right? If you tell us that we can't say this, then it will become more important to say it so that the government doesn't have the ability to limit speech. That's one point. Another point is that the insulting of Islam is the only reason why it's now normal to you as a Muslim for me to criticize Islam. Because it was, you're saying that, oh, we should allow, you as a Muslim are telling me that, oh, we should allow people to criticize Islam respectfully but not insult Islam. You would never say this. Like, I would ask them, like, would you have said this 5 years ago, 2 years ago, even? You, many of you, most, I mean, almost all of you Muslims who are saying this now in Iran, just a few years ago, you couldn't even imagine listening to somebody criticize Islam. And then I'm like, what changed? What changed? Why do you saying, like, oh, people should be allowed to respectfully criticize Islam? Because when we probably started this conversation with me, you Muslim, by saying, like, Armin, why can't you be what respectful like this person? Like, why? I like the people, you actually start praising people anti-Islam. As a Muslim, I hear you praise Iranian critics of Islam by comparing them to some other Iranians that insult Islam. And I'm telling them, this actually shows to me that it's those in people who insult Islam that normalized criticizing Islam in your eye. Because if we didn't have people insulting Islam, the most radical thing to do would be criticizing Islam. And because there's nothing more radical to compare it to, you would not be allowing it because you would see it as something crazy radical. It's only when we have something more radical than criticizing Islam that you became tolerant of criticizing Islam. Because compare, like, that person that only criticizes Islam and doesn't insult Islam, the fact that you're accepting him, he owes that to me or people like me who went out and insulted Islam, and now you're saying, like, oh, let's go to that guy and listen to him because unlike Armin, he's actually very respectful and criticizes Islam respectfully. But he owes the fact that his what he's doing is now normal and acceptable to people like us because he's now being compared to people like us. And that's why I say, and I get him to admit that if they like the fact that they're thinking that, oh, it's not a big deal to criticize Islam, it's only because now there's so many Iranians that constantly insult Islam, and because that exists, criticizing Islam doesn't seem like a big deal. I try to get them to admit that, and I say, like, there's a saying in Persian. It goes like this: به مرگ بگیرین تا به تب راضی شن. خب یعنی this means that we go, like, imagine if, like, we go with death so that they can accept a fever. Like, I think what this means is that imagine if somebody comes and tells you that, oh, you're gonna die, and you're like, what the hell? I'm gonna die? And they're like, no, 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 don't worry, you only have a fever. But if I just told you you have a fever, you're gonna have a bad fever, you're gonna be like, oh no, I have a bad fever. But now if I tell you, don't worry, you have a bad fever, you're gonna be like, oh my god, thank God, I only have a bad fever, right? So that's a Persian saying, like, so tell them death so that they accept a fever, right? So I'm saying this is what we're doing, right? By going extreme, you tolerate something, you tolerate the criticism. So I have convinced some people, including Mehdi Nasir, with this line of argument, but this is more challenging. It's harder to convince Muslims that insulting Islam should be also acceptable. But even more difficult than that is convincing non Muslim Iranians that insulting national symbols should be free. That is even more challenging. And that's a conversation that we could have another time. But that's a very interesting conversation. I just want to say where I stand on this, okay? Because there are people on both sides of me, right? So I'm a free speech maximalist. I'm not a free speech absolutist. I'm a free speech maximalist, right? So what I say is that when it comes to insulting, so a lot of Iranians think like, okay, we should be able, in the future of Iran, we should be able to insult Islam, but it should be illegal to insult Shahnameh or insult, I don't know, all the symbols of Iran, or the flag, for example, or the king, or the Iran symbols of Iran. That should be illegal, right? And there are some other people who say, no, we should be going for free speech. What the hell? The Islamic Republic didn't have free speech. So now that the Islamic Republic is going, we should have free speech and all of that, right? I say I'm on the side of free speech, but as one vote, right? Because there are some other people who are also on the side of free speech, but they're more more radical than me, as in that this is shouldn't even be up for a vote. Like free speech should be one of the principles of Iran, and people shouldn't be able to to decide for us to ban any form of speech. I am somewhere in the middle of these two groups of people by saying that I would vote for maximum amount of free speech, but I think the Iranian people should decide the level of free speech that we have, rather than saying that this is a principle that we don't get to choose. So I will vote for maximum amount of free speech, but Iranian people should be like as just one vote, not as this should be a principle. So we should have elections where people would decide what are like would they would pick their representatives who pick the laws, and the only four principles that we have is secularism, democracy, border integrity, and the equal individual rights before the laws. Those are our four principles, and the level of free speech should be decided based on who we vote for, both for writing the constitution and our parliament, where people come and vote for the level of free speech. I hope, but I also say that if there is any limitation of freedom of speech, which I would not vote for, I would vote for maximum level. But if other Iranians vote for us to have some limitations, I think those limitations should be based on the laws that are passed in the parliament, not the laws written in our constitution, so that we could more easily change it. So when we are electing the people who write the constitution, I think that with the limitation, if Iranian people vote for limiting free speech to some degree, that should not be written in the constitution. Vote for it in the parliament, so that if we're like, okay, we fucked up, that is actually does not work. We want more free speech. It will be easier to go back to having more free speech. So that's my position. Basically, I managed to make everyone angry. Both the free speech advocates are angry with me because they think that this should not be up to the people, this should not be voted on. Free speech is a basic fundamental human right, and everybody should have it to the max without elections. And the people who want to have some limitations, they're also, I can manage to make them angry as well, because my vote specifically would be for allowing any form of insult to anything, so that I managed to basically make everyone angry. I saw Shauna and Eric. wanted to say something? Rachel, Shauna?
Can you guys hear me? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So what about the fact that so for Iran, I don't have a vote because I'm American, not Iranian. But what about the fact that I guess my concern in general though about the principle that you were discussing is that there are cultures and people who don't believe in free speech. But what are you doing in situation where what do you think about in situations in general, to broaden the just the concept and the principle about those types of situations? Like, there's okay, so if the Puritans had been left in charge completely and hadn't been bullied by the Constitution, they would have put in free speech laws, or they would have put limits on speech. I mean, that's just that's the woke their woke descendants would love to put yeah, have done everything in their power to create hate speech laws.
I don't understand your question.
Okay, what yeah, because I'm not enunciating it well. Sometimes the problem is that the people don't like free speech, and in order to get them to accept it, you kind of have to force it on them. Sometimes free speech has to be forced on the people via law.
Okay, so I mean, free speech is always forced because if it's a right, it's always forced because there's a law and the law is being enforced, right? And free speech is not binary, right? So it's a spectrum. You could have different degrees of free speech, right? So, for example, in in France, you have more free speech than you have in Iran right now, but not as much as in the United States, right? So United States level of freedom of speech is higher than France, and France's freedom of speech is astronomically higher than what we have in Iran, right? So it's not the Iranian people obviously want free speech, okay, but the question is not whether they want free speech, is they want what level of free speech they want. Do they want to go as far as France or they want to go as far as America? I'm somebody who wants to go as far as the United States. But the Iranians who disagree with me, it's not that they're against free speech; they're for free speech, but they want to go to the level of a country like Germany or France. So, for example, in France, you're not allowed to burn the flag. In France, you're not
Okay.
allowed to do that. In Germany, you're not allowed to do a Nazi salute or deny the Holocaust. You're not allowed to do that. So it's still, they're still considered free speech countries. I don't know if UK is still considered a free speech country.
I
Okay,
mean, they have
but
low-key blasphemy laws, but yeah.
yeah. So yeah, so in Iran, they want free speech, but maybe not like insulting the flag, for example. They're like, okay, let's have some. Maybe just a few things should be not. I mean, I'm not saying they want that. I'm just saying the disagreement is over that. So for example, I had a poll on my channel and it was 50-50. It was like 50% said like we want complete free speech to the level of the United States, and another 50% wanted some limitations, like a country like France or
Okay.
Germany.
As an American, and I realize this is very much coming from my perspective, I I just look at France and Germany as tyrannical authoritarian states. While I recognize that that is they're less tyrannical than other places,
Fun.
still just it's
Okay.
yeah, that's how
That's very by the way, that's very American of you.
it is very American. I recognize that this is, my American coming out, but I just am
Yeah.
like, "No, you have to."
But based on that metric, Shana, every country on the world, based on that metric, every single country in the world is tyranny except the United States, based on the way you categorize it.
This is why I preface this by saying that this is coming from
Okay.
a very American perspective. And by the way, if I'm being logical and I'm removing my correctness and pretending that I'm not right for a second, I can see sympathetically that there are probably sometimes reasons in certain countries to have hate speech laws or whatever laws. Like in Germany, there was probably a reason for that, whatever, after the Holocaust and stuff, to limit that.
And then I make
I don't necessarily agree with it, but I understand the logic that would get them there.
So here's the thing. I actually don't understand the logic because I'm a skeptic. Okay. I have my political philosophical position when it comes to my politics is that I'm a humanist, I'm a skeptic, I want the maximum highest level of well-being, and I don't 100% trust myself to know what the best solution is, right? This is why I think liberty works. And the reason why liberty works is because the best methods cannot be invented, they need to be discovered by allowing a Darwinian competition between different ideas to fight each other and see the result of the wisdom of the crowd. This is why liberty produces the best results. So I might come out and say that I think this works. And I do think that liberty means that different societies will come up with
Oh, the difference,
similar
yeah. Yeah.
similar but different solution, but very similar. Like there are certain principles that seem to be working everywhere, but there will be some differences to them to some degree based on the cultural, the historical, the geographical, and the economic condition of that society. So what works for America is not necessarily exactly, it will be similar, but it would not be exactly what works for Israel or what works for Iran. There will be some differences. And the best way to discover what works is to create a society where you have the highest amount, not absolute. You need some limitations. You need to have some limitations for the framework to be able to survive, but you need to find the right balance between limitations and freedom to come up with the highest amount of liberty for so that you have the highest amount of competition for that society to be able to discover the best method for them. And this is only through the emergent property of a Darwinian model that it will be discovered. So in Iran, even if I want the highest level of free speech, I think that if we allow the wisdom of the crowd to create different political parties, different people with different political opinions to come advocate for their position, if they're free and if they're competing against each other, whatever comes out of that as the solution is probably the right solution for that time. I just wanted to make sure that it's not too sticky so that if it changes, we could change as well, right? But I
Right.
think basically I will respect the wisdom of the crowd over my own wisdom. That's what I'm saying. And I would respect whatever the Iranian people
Okay,
come up with.
so,
Yeah.
let me clarify when I'm talking specifically, I'm thinking it's more specifically about Germany because I don't know why France has stupid laws, but I just assume it's just because 'cause they're French, but I just can understand why the wisdom of the crowd would lead them to want to limit that because they had a lot of Germans didn't know what was going on, and when they found out what was going on.
But you don't know if it's the wisdom of the crowd. Were the society free enough to be able to come up with? So you only know if it's the wisdom of the crowd if you actually have given the crowd the maximum amount of liberty that you could to know that this is coming from the crowd. Was it truly the wisdom of the crowd, or was there limitations on how the crowd could express itself?
I don't know, but I suspect it was, but I'm basing that based off of what modern Germans have felt, and
Mm.
they're obviously like 70 years ago. So I don't know, but I do know that a lot of Germans were like we had no, there was a lot of Germans that had no idea what was going on. So,
Mm. We could actually go look into the history of it.
yeah, so I would have
I
to know
think
the
for a
history
lot
of
of, yeah, yeah, yeah. So yeah, we could go. I suspect it's going to have to deal with a lot of the trauma from the shame and the guilt from World War II. It might have something to do with it, but
I
we
well,
could talk
that's
about
what
that
I'm
later.
thinking as well. My thinking
Right.
is that that's why. Now, that being said, I do think that they've kind of gone to the other extreme and maybe they could use some
Yes,
pushback, but that's a whole other.
that's why I think any limitation of free speech, if it comes from a society, it shouldn't be in the constitution. It should be laws passed by parliament so that we're easier. It's easier for us
Is
to
it
go back. Yeah.
is it in the German constitution?
I don't know. Actually, I have to look it up.
Okay,
Yeah,
well, that's
good
maybe
question though.
that's something we do research on and we have a discussion about later. Okay,
Right?
that's
Yeah.
it. I'm
I,
done.
yeah, I
Okay.
mean, if we still have time, Hila wanted to give like at most a 3 sentence update about new order for the public from the IDF, and then Eric.
Okay. Hila and then Eric. Sorry, Eric.
Oh,
Short.
am I there? Okay. Hey, I don't preach anything
Wait.
about Islam. Is it my
Okay.
turn?
Then we go
Okay.
Hila. Now
I
that you
don't I
started, so
really don't
just
want to
quickly
preach
though, because
anything about Islam, but I do a lot of research because I'm trying to figure out ways to work this stuff out. One of the things in Islam they talk about, the old saying about the pen, how bountiful is the pen that teaches man something he wouldn't otherwise have known. Okay, for me, that's fundamentally the biggest free speech thing that has ever been written in the history of man. We kind of, when you look at Islamic Islam, the problem is really these freaking governments. It's not even Islam. Everybody makes this a religious thing. Everybody's at everybody's throats. The biggest thing is these idiots running these governments. They have no authority under Sharia law. Do you realize that there is no Sharia law that gives these mullahs the authority to rule in Islam? It doesn't exist. I'm not going to go into proving that to you. I'm just going to demonstrate it. Look at Saudi Arabia. They're the monarchy. Turkey's secular. Saddam was secular. Boom.
okay, Eric, that's not true. That's not true. Islam teaches it's a fundamental part of Islam that you need Islamic law, the Islamic rule. It's a very fundamental part of Islamic teaching, and Islam itself is the problem. These governments that you're talking about, they don't actually represent Islam. Okay, they're actually
That's
too
right. They
secular
write
compared to
their
what
own
Islam.
laws. They write their own laws
Yes,
for
but that's
government.
but Islam is worse. You think that they are bad and Islam is better? They are bad and Islam is 100 times worse.
Mm.
Islam, they are not Islam, but ISIS is Islam. Okay, so
Yeah,
you think
yeah,
like they are
yeah.
bad. Okay, so Islam is actually the problem. You don't say Islam is not the problem. Islam does believe in rule. So it's true that the Saudis don't represent Islam, but ISIS does, right?
We got to do something to end it. That's all I can say. It's all got to go. The people in Islam suffer the most. The women, the children. How can you live? How can you live under that? But I'm glad you helped clarify me on that point, Armin.